how's it going?
Great,
Glad you could
man.
make it.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, if there's a
I
little
heard.
lag here. We'll work through that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So I heard some of your music, and we connected through Reddit first, through some
We
post
did.
that. So yeah, and you've released like 66 albums so far in your
66 as of
lifetime,
a few weeks ago. Yeah,
and what from what I've heard, it's mostly metal. Is that correct?
that is correct. Yes. Instrumental metal
Yeah.
would be the best descriptor. The way I've enjoyed describing my music is imagine the love child of Joe Satriani, left for dead, and raised by circus midgets in Slayer's backyard. If you can imagine that, you've got an idea of what my music is going to sound like.
Yeah. I definitely hear the Satriani influences, and
Thank you.
yeah, um, that's a good combo right there for sure.
I feel like it's a pretty accurate statement, and hopefully that will encourage people to go listen to my music and see for themselves if they agree with that. If someone comes up with a better descriptor, I would love to hear it.
I'll have to think on that. Um, so so I'll go ahead and show them your website because it's
By all
really cool. It
means.
has all your albums on there.
Yeah, what you're seeing there is just each of those is one of my album covers. And as far as you said mostly metal. That's absolutely true. My 63rd album, Permanent Cognitive Damage Category, that I'd say is one of the biggest departures from the metal. That one is it's a single song. It's 44 minutes, 22 seconds. And it's this really kind of ambient synths, and it's just kind of weird. That would be, if you start there, that is not a good way to get to know what my music is. The rest of my albums pretty much fall into that heavy metal category. My 28th album, which is titled Solemn Tales of Baleful Beasts, that one I went right there, brown one in the middle, just past it. That's okay. That one is much more acoustic in nature, and there's some very fun, still very upbeat pieces on that. And so, yeah, just, I do experiment around a bit. My process has definitely changed over the course of doing all of these albums, because if you are going to do a lot of music, you're probably going to get bored just doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, makes sense. Who does the album art?
All me. I did all of that. The way this kind of came about for me, I had been playing with some punk and metal bands for, you're pretty well ensconced in that, over in the Seattle, Everett area of Western Washington. And we did some great stuff, had some really good shows. But if anyone out there is listening to this and they're a musician, then they're probably aware of the stereotype of the irresponsible musician. We get a lot of musicians not showing up late. They show up drunk. They show up high. They didn't practice. These, unfortunately, are often more common than showing up on time and being able to play your parts. And it gets very frustrating. I know you and I have spoken a little bit in the past, and you've dealt with some of those frustrations yourself. You know what that's like. And so after parting ways with those groups, mostly on really good terms, there's one group I parted ways with that not such a clean break, but for the most part, I'm on great terms with all the musicians I've played with in the past. I decided to put my own group together and immediately started running into all of the same things. And then I just kind of realized, hey, I don't really need a drummer, because I've got a computer program that can do that really effectively. And I don't need a piano player, because I've got a computer program that can do that. And I don't need a string player. So it's basically, I said, I'm not a great singer, but if I do instrumentals, I've got everything I need. So I just started doing it on my own. And at that point, I just made a hard line that I will not collaborate with anyone on anything, not song ideas, not album covers, nothing. So I did everything because then I didn't have to rely on anyone else. And I liked this because one, I got credit for everything. But more important than that was I got to take responsibility for everything. So if anything didn't work right, if the album didn't sound right, if I played a part wrong, if I programmed a part wrong, if something broke down, that was my fault. That was on me, and I was responsible for it. So I took everything. And the first thing that I actually backed off on that was when my daughter suggested a song title to me. I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I will let my daughter name some of my songs. And she's an adult. I'm really old. So she's come up with some great song titles. And in fact, my latest album, Schizonoid Paraphrenic, that is one of hers.
Yeah. You were telling me that. That's great. Yeah, and like, I can imagine like when you get deep into it with the band, if someone makes a mistake, like you got to have like good relationships with those people to be able to like hash that out. And
You do.
that's hard to come by, and that takes time to build.
It does. It's hard. And when you look at bands like ZZ Top, who never had a lineup change to my knowledge, Rush only had one lineup change. And these groups, they worked together for literal decades and made clearly two very different groups of musicians, but they both made excellent music. And
I remember hearing about Rush and like Geddy Lee and David Lyson. That's his name, right?
Alex Lifeson.
Alex Lyson.
That's totally okay.
But yeah, they were like, middle school buddies or something, and then like they played for like 10 years before they even, went out on the road.
Yeah, and they did great, but that's so rare to find a group of musicians that works together that well. And on the converse end of that, one of what I would consider the greatest bands of all time, ABBA, clearly those four people didn't have the capability of making a bad song. I mean, they just wrote a song, and it was like almost every song they wrote was a hit. But they didn't last very long because they had all kinds of interpersonal, political. I don't know everything that went on behind the scenes with ABBA, but it didn't work out. They didn't have the kind of what you might even call political chemistry that a band like Rush has that enabled them to last for so long. The Beatles are another great example. Clearly, great songwriting, great musicianship, great performance aspect. But they started having their internal struggles, and they didn't have the longevity that some other bands have had.
Yeah, and they came along at a time period where it was like a lot of political stuff going on for sure.
Oh, very, yes.
So your YouTube channel too, so people know how to find your music.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the Mad Poet.
If you look up the Mad Poet, I will probably come up at the Oddologist. If you type in youtube.com/at the Oddologist, that should pull me up. And I've got all of my albums are available there. There's I don't think I made a playlist for my latest album, but there are playlists for each album. And I'd be more than happy to have people go through all that and see what it is. From my second album to my 50th album, there's video of me playing the lead guitar parts. And that was working really well. Oh, the smoke machine catches on fire. That was from one of my live shows. It did, yeah. I had a smoke machine. It was in this room. I was actually facing the other way in the room at the time. And that image of me there is me running out of the room. I edited out my actual linguistic outpourings in this. But I just came to the end of the song. Something smelled wrong. And I was like, I need to check my machine. And I was just starting to see the orange light up inside there. And there happened to be a damp towel from my shower laying on the floor. So I grabbed the smoke machine. I run out of the room with it. Oh, it was exciting. Fortunately, the house did not burn down. And so that worked out all right.
And your Twitch, you were telling me how all of your shows, your live shows on Twitch, are synced up with your lights show. And that's really cool. You can see it kind of here. The music is matched up to the. And you were telling me it's a really technical process. So could you explain that a little bit for everyone?
Absolutely. The way I set up my live shows, and it might be a little choppy what you see coming through on the video here, but so basically I use my recording program as kind of like a headquarters for a repository of everything that happens. And I've got a fairly powerful computer to enable me to do this, fortunately. But so the music is in my recording program, and I've got my drum sampler in there and my piano sampler and my strings sampler and all that stuff, and my pre-recorded guitars and everything that I've already recorded. And then I run my guitar through it, which exactly what you're hearing there, that's running through my recording program. And so there's the music aspect. And then there's a protocol for the non-musicians out there. There's a protocol called MIDI, Musical Instrument Digital Interface, which is a way of triggering. Originally, it was basically just for triggering sounds, but you can use it to trigger just about any device that you can connect to it. So I use this MIDI protocol to trigger camera changes. So I have cameras set around the room to get me from different angles. And so those cameras are changing by these signals being sent out from my MIDI protocol in my recording program. And then I also send a MIDI signal out to my sheet music program, because I don't memorize all of these albums. I don't have 66 albums committed to memory. So when I'm playing, the guitar solos that people see and hear are improvised. I should say almost entirely improvised. I can talk a little more about my soloing concepts later on.
Sure.
So mostly improvised, but then when I'm doing the rhythm guitar parts, I actually have the sheet music is being scrolled automatically on my primary monitor. And so I can see the sheet music to play along to. And then it also sends a signal out to the lights, to a lighting program, which triggers the lights. And so on every album, I have to put in a light command for every light that turns on and then back off. So on a typical album, I will have around 20 to 25,000 light commands that I've programmed in for the show. And that's probably the single most boring part of setting up a show, is programming the lights.
That's wild, dude.
It's pretty fun. Sorry, go ahead.
That's awesome, dude. So you're saying there's not like a specific program that you use? You just kind of like send the MIDI out to these devices and they pick it up and yeah.
No, so there are programs for all of it. So
okay,
I use so my recording program is called Reaper. It's a very popular recording program. It's very powerful. And you could do this with any. I mean, there's Logic and Cubase and Acid and Reason and
I use FL Studio. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all great. They're all really good programs. I've been a Reaper user for probably 15 plus years, so I'm accustomed to it. I know it well. So that's where everything kind of happens. And then from there, for the cameras, I'm actually sending a signal out to a program called OBS, which is Open Broadcast Software. And that actually changes a scene, and each scene is set up for a different camera. And then I send out for my sheet music, I use a program called Sibelius. It's a rather expensive program. It's a very good one. So in that's my sheet music, and that's where I write all of my music. I compose everything there. and that scrolls along while I play. And then there's a program called
Sibelius
Q.
is great.
Sorry, say again.
Yeah, Sibelius. I use it too. It's really great. I think it's the best composing software out there.
It's pretty solid. It's pretty solid. It's unfortunate how expensive it is because that's very prohibitive for a lot of persons.
I have Sibelius first. It was $50. I never get tired of it.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I didn't realize that one. I know that that's like the student version, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was like, and like I like it because, and I never change it because the hotkeys, right? I'm so used to everything and where everything is. Like, I don't want to get the new version and then not be able to have my process that I've been working on for so long. So,
right. Yeah, I'm on Sibelius 8.1, I think, and I'm not going to upgrade to the most recent. I don't like the subscription model. I've got what I've got. I'm good. It does more than I need it to. But as far as the lights, I send that signal out to a program called QLC Plus, which I think stands for Q Light Controller Plus. And so that receives the signal and then it translates it. And I have a little box sitting, it's probably like, I don't know, 2x3 box sitting under my computer that actually turns it into what's called a DMX signal. And the DMX is a protocol specifically for triggering stage lights. And so that's the kind of chain. And then there's these cables. My room's really dark, but kind of over on the sides here, I have these plywood painted facades, and there's a space behind that. So all my cables run around through that, so I don't have cables sitting all over the floor. I've tried to make everything kind of nice and neat, and I like to be organized.
That's awesome. So do you want to go ahead and show that video?
Sure. Yeah. I'll throw this up on the screen here. And this here is just a clip. I'm going to change our audio a bit, so we won't talk for a moment. We're just going to play this clip of me playing one of my shows. So that's a touch of that there. And let me kill that screen sharing again.
Why do you like Twitch? So like, do you like Twitch because like the live communication you get with the audience? Is it kind of like that? Or do you like the interface?
I actually multicast out to, I believe, 13 websites right now. So I'm going to Twitch, YouTube, 2 different Facebook pages, Trovo, DLive, Nino, Nono, Picardo, Africa TV. I feel like I'm missing 1 or 2. Live Space, which is a beta test right now for a new streaming platform. I think I've missed 1 or 2 platforms. But so I go out to all of these, and truth be told, I don't understand most of them. I've got my stream keys set up through a service called Live Push. It's livepush.io. And so as I see people pop up on like DLive, I'm like, oh, I've got some viewers on DLive. I should go check out this website and see what it's actually about. They all seem really cool. They're a little different. They've got different kind of interfaces for how people interact in chat or for tips or whatever. But they all seem like very cool, different platforms. So it's kind of nice having. When I got to the point where I was eligible for the affiliate program on Twitch, I chose not to take it because when you sign that contract, it disallows multicasting, multi-streaming. And I just like my multi-streaming too much. I think Twitch is a great service. It's very cool. The chat on there is excellent. The interface is very easy to understand. Some people have kind of decried that Twitch doesn't have great capacity to get yourself out there. It doesn't have really good what we call discoverability. So if you're only doing things on Twitch, you're less likely to be found. And clearly, I'm a small creator. I don't have a big following. But I also do the kind of music that doesn't really lend itself to the most mainstream kind of accessibility. I'm doing instrumental metal for the most part. So that doesn't have as big a viewership as if I were doing, modern R&B.
So tell me, you're also a guitar teacher. So tell me a little bit about your process for teaching and how long you've been doing it for and where you got started with that.
Yeah. So that's kind of my primary income is teaching. I love teaching. When I was a kid, I actually wanted to be a high school teacher. That was my initial goal. And instead of going to college after high school, I went in the military and was still very seriously thinking about teaching. But what I started to realize when I got out of school was it wasn't being a student that made me dislike the public education system. It was the public education system. And this isn't really within the scope of what we want to talk about here today, but I have big problems with public education. So I didn't want to be part of that system anymore. And when I was in my mid-20s, I started having people ask me, why don't you teach guitar? And my answer was because I'm a student of guitar. I realize now that I'm actually just about to turn 52. I realize now that I should have been teaching guitar at that time. I did know enough to do it. But because even now in my 50s, I'm still a student of guitar. And I think that's one of the most important things you can always do is continue to be a student of whatever art you are a part of. So it wasn't until my mid 30s, so about 15, 16 years ago probably now, that I really started taking teaching seriously. And there was a studio that I was with a band I was associated with, we were practicing out of, and someone wanted to take lessons. And I'm like, well, this is also a teaching studio. Let's do this. Come on in, I'll give you a guitar lesson. And then the owner of the studio was like, hey, why don't you just start teaching here? And I'm like, okay. And then I'd been doing, I think I was working, the last actual job I had was Starbucks. And they started going through some layoffs. I was actually at a 24-hour store and they stopped doing 24 hours. So they had to let some people go. I was like, okay, you know what? Let me go. I'm starting up this teaching thing. And so then I just kind of went whole hog on that. And so that's kind of how I got started with the teaching. As far as my, how I do it these days, because Sarah and I moved out to this small town in the middle of Eastern Washington, there's not a lot of people out here. There aren't any show opportunities, and it's not a town with enough people to actually sustain a guitar teaching job. So everything I do now is online, just like what you and I are doing here. And the funny thing, most of my students are still over in Western Washington, where we came from. I fortunately maintained most of my students during that move and switched them to online. And I love the online teaching. It's great because I've got so many resources for teaching right here in my, I'm pointing at things like people can see what I'm pointing at, but you can't. But so I've got all these resources in here, and like we've been doing here, I can screen share and I can, make a PDF of whatever we've been doing. I can pull up my sheet music and pop notes in. So that's all great. And as far as my philosophy of teaching, it's, if we look at what would make a successful student, what would constitute success? To me, that is whatever that person has told me they want to do. That's what I want to get them to. So I've had a huge variety of students, and I'll teach anything. I'll teach jazz, I'll teach metal, I'll teach rock or pop or blues or country or whatever you want. I'm nonpartisan with that. most of my students are either hard rock or classical guitars, kind of my main thing. But, I've had students come to me and they say, I want to be able to join a band. I want to be able to do a show. I want to be able to do recordings. I want to play with my church group. Or some of them are just like, hey, you know what? I want to learn some chords and be able to strum a guitar and sing with my grandkids around the campfire. So success is whatever that person wants to achieve. And, a great example, I had a student come to me once that he had been with another guitar teacher, and the guitar teacher was all, you got to learn his music theory. We got to work on the circle of fifths. And he's like, all I want to do is learn some Grateful Dead tunes so I can jam out to Grateful Dead. And so he came to me and I'm like, great, let's teach us some Grateful Dead tunes, man. Let's talk about the Dead. You don't need the circle of fifths for that. I love the circle of fifths, but you don't need it if that's what your goal is. So to me, that's kind of my philosophy, is how can I move a person to succeed at the thing at which they wish to succeed?
Yeah, that's great. So I want to ask you, like you grew up, you were a teenager in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So did that music, like how was that? How was just growing up in the 80s? I always love to hear, people's perspectives for those time periods. Like you were a teenager in the 80s. That must have been wild.
I had, so often we hear about musicians who had these terrible upbringings and, there was abuse or they were abandoned or whatever. I didn't have that. My parents they should be the poster parents of what good parenting looks like.
I just mean how was it? Like, did you go to bands? Like, did you see Van Halen,
Well, this kind of plays right in. Fortunately, because I did have a good upbringing, I had a lot of pretty good opportunities. And the first concert I went to was with my whole family, and we went and we saw the band Styx on the Paradise Theater tour, which, this is a great first concert experience, right? And this was a huge, huge show. They actually had 18 semi-trucks to do this concert. And they would have 2 full sets. 9 semi-trucks are up in Seattle, right? And then the next 9 are down in Portland setting up, and then they're leapfrogging. So it's just this huge, massive show. Absolutely brilliant. So that was my first concert experience. And I was 10 at the time. That was 1981. And we all fell in love with concerts. So we kept going to concerts. And these were the big stadium tours. That was kind of the high point of that. And in these stadium tours, I saw Dio in 1985, New Year's Eve. Yngwie Malmsteen was leading in for him. I saw Malmsteen a few times. I only saw Dio the one time. Black Sabbath. I did see Van Halen in 89 with Hagar. That was also, they had Metallica leading in. That was my first Metallica concert. I think Dokken was at that one. There was like 9 bands. That was a big Monsters of Rock concert. So it was just, yeah. So I went to a lot of concerts. And then, what I started to, Alice Cooper. I can't not say Alice Cooper because, again, brilliant work. But as I started to get a little older, I started to realize that wasn't the only concert experience to have. And so I started going to these smaller coffee shop shows and stuff and watching jazz bands, right? And, folk singers, and realized that there's this entirely other world of music other than these stadium concerts. So it was a very cool way as far as coming of age musically. And that time I didn't play guitar. So this was just me as a music lover, and I kind of grew up. We had, basically rock and pop in the house, a bit of classical. So my dad was really a rock guy. So there was a lot of like Bachman Turner Overdrive, the Beatles, Elvis. And my mother was more of the pop sentimentality. So there was a lot of, Carpenters and ABBA, Barry Manilow. And to this day, I'm a fan of all of that. You can put Manilow on and I'm just like, let's do this. I love all that old stuff. So it's a very musically very diverse kind of upbringing just from what I got to listen to and what I got to see.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, it's funny, like my mom went to like a Led Zeppelin concert when she was young, but like she was never really, she likes classic rock, but she was never like a huge fan of it. In my
Sure.
opinion, she probably could use more music. But she liked Stevie Nicks and like
Oh,
Heart.
Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks. Oh, Hart. I saw Hart once. This was, I didn't see Hart. I saw Ann Wilson and Friends. This was probably 20 years ago. And she had done a cancer benefit. Her sister, Nancy, had just had babies. I think she had twins. And my friend Danny, who owned a music store out in Everett, Danny's Music was a great place. He got to fill in for Nancy with Ann Wilson, and Chris Cornell was in that show. So I got to see Chris before he passed. I got to see Ann. I got to see my buddy Danny play with all these. It was great. So we're a little short on time. Do you want to pick this back up? Because I'm really enjoying this conversation.